I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is things are not always what they seem. So we have moments that we get triggered and reactive and have an extreme response to some kind of event in our lives. And very often, maybe most often, the truth is that whatever that trigger was resides somewhere deep in our past. And so today we're going to talk about digging deeper to find what the sources are so that we can actually cultivate freedom. So good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. It's so good to have you joining us this morning. Before we get started talking about how things are not always as they seem, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, and allow all those sensations to bring you present into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So things are not always as they seem. And while we talk a lot about cultivating a trust and trusting our gut and cultivating that sense of centered intuition and alignment, it's also the case that many times, particularly when we're in a reactive state, our perceptions. Good morning, Dido. So good to have you joining us this morning. Welcome. It's often the case that when we're in a reactive state, whatever it is that is triggering us is an echo or is echoing prior trauma, prior experience, and prior unresolved experience. So our brain goes into this automatic kind of process, associating whatever the threat is in this moment with a threat from the past. We're saying, oh, this situation, it's the same situation as that situation that happened before. And we react to that past situation rather than actually being able to be fully present. We talk about having triggers. You pressed my buttons. Well, how did those buttons get created in the first place? We had an experience that created some kind of trauma. We encoded that somehow, embodied that in our body and being because we left it in some way unresolved. And then it's there with a button that's just saying, press me, push this button. It's just an invitation. And any passerby, or maybe people who are more intimately related in your life are walking by or interacting, and bam, there that button gets pressed, or that switch gets flipped, and all of a sudden there's the reactivity. And so what we get to do is notice when we get really reactive about something. It's not always possible to notice it in the moment, because it's sort of like a runaway train. The switch gets flipped and we're off to the races. However, eventually, hopefully, we can step back from that reactivity and, with curiosity and compassion, say, what the heck was that? What just happened? What was that? And our inclination is often to justify our reaction, to point fingers at the other, to say, well, you did this and you did that and you whatever. And there are two sides to this conversation, at least two sides to this conversation. It may be that the other person's behavior is objectionable or maybe even egregious, and there's our reaction to it. And so what we're addressing right now is the reaction, because how we can properly, that's not the greatest word, but how we can most effectively address the behavioral issue is when we have clarity about our own contribution to the issue itself, right? So I don't know if you have a triggering word. Like there were certain words that just really bothered me. Years ago, the word insert, for whatever reason, really made my skin crawl, just really rankled me tremendously. And somebody could say that word and I would get all skeevy. Well, that was clearly on me. Clearly, there's something going on in me. And I'm using that as an example because in this particular case, it wasn't like there was an egregious behavior. It was just somebody saying something, and I had my trigger. It pushed buttons for me. Okay. So it reminds me of, probably most of you aren't old enough for this reference, but the Three Stooges used to have a skit when somebody said Niagara Falls. All of a sudden, this other guy would say, slowly I turned, inch by inch, step by step. All of a sudden, just Niagara Falls put them into this whole other world. And this is what happens with our triggers. So there are two sides. There's the thing that was the triggering event, and there's the reaction response to the trigger. Right now, we're talking about the reaction response to the trigger. And what happens is, most often we point the finger at the other person, placing the blame on them for the feelings we have, for the reactivity we have. And we can find in so many cases, maybe not Niagara Falls or insert, but we can find so many instances where we have the opportunity to lay blame and to externalize the cause for our response. And so what we're talking about today is recognizing that it's not all out there. It's never all out there, regardless of how egregious the behavior is from the other side. It's never all out there, because I then we get to respond or react to whatever that stimulus was. And when we have the experience, when we're able to step back and say, what the heck just happened here? When we're able to step back and look, we can recognize that most often, or very often, our reaction is disproportionate and to the action. And when we notice that, it gives us a clue. Because really, what are we up to? Hopefully, we're in the pursuit of freedom, in the quest of waking up from this hypnosis of reactivity and conditioning and patterning that keeps us bound and limited and restricted. So when we can step back and look at this reactivity, then maybe we can recognize, oh, this was a little extreme. This response, what's going on for me? What made me react in that way? Even when somebody else is behaving badly, it doesn't mean that we have to, right? And it doesn't mean that we have to behave in any particular way. We typically behave the way we do because we've been trained or entrained or programmed or conditioned or patterned through experiences, through trauma, through overt teaching. And so if we have this profound response, we get to look at, well, what happened? What does this remind me of? Is a really powerful question, actually. What does this remind me of? Probably when I was growing up. What does this remind me of? Oh my gosh, this reminds me of every time that I was doing something and my parent walked into the room unannounced, for example, no knock on the door, just barged in and violated my privacy. I don't know why that example came up, but so when somebody walks in the room without knocking, all of a sudden I go off the deep end. Why? Because of that feeling of violation from when I was younger, perhaps. So this is an example. It doesn't mean that it's okay for that person to barge into your room without knocking. And that's something that can be addressed, but it can be addressed either in a rage, like, how dare you violate my privacy? What do you think you're doing? Or it could be addressed with, hey, would you do me a favor and please knock before you come in the room? And what we can recognize is twofold here. One is the experience that we're having about this whole interaction communication. One is fraught and upset and outraged and reactive out of the history. And the other is present and connected and communicative. That's the one on our experience. And on the other side, imagine the impact on the other person. So the other person did something not okay, and it's possible to make the request, right? Either to make the request, it may be that this behavior is persistent and there's a deep frustration about it, and maybe at some point hollering makes the difference and drives the point home. I don't know, but I'm saying we get to look at two sides. There's the stimulus and there's the response. And the one thing that we have the ability to impact is our response. We can't control another person's behavior. We can try. We can try. And we may be successful in getting compliance here and there. But what we can do is we can be accountable and responsible for our own behavior, rather than walking around saying, don't press my buttons, because our buttons are our own. We get to be accountable for them, ultimately. And that's how we get to reclaim our power. That's how we get to express our own sovereignty. That's how we get to step into our wholeness, is by owning these reactivities and addressing them. We don't get to put them all on other people. You know, otherwise I'm a walking minefield. You know, somebody steps the wrong way, says the wrong thing, and bam, I explode. First of all, that doesn't do me any good, exploding and being on the edge of explosion at any given moment. And second of all, what does it do to all the people around me trying to walk around on a minefield? I grew up walking around on minefields. I'll tell you, it wasn't a good experience. You know, it was very anxiety provoking, not knowing when something was going to explode around me, with people that had their buttons all over the place. Right? And you never know when you're going to step on one of these mines in the minefield. And we never know when our detonation trigger is going to get pulled. So let's address these things. Let's address them with compassion and curiosity, not judgment, not pretending they don't exist, not shuffling them in the past, not trying to control everybody around us. So by telling them, don't press my buttons. I mean, we can tell them, please don't press my buttons, or when you do that, this is what happens for me. And ultimately, we get to be accountable for taking care of those things. That's what we get to do. So as we're having this conversation, are you able to think back and source maybe a situation where you were pretty reactive, and maybe use this opportunity in this moment to look, well, what does that remind me of? You know, all the time when I was growing up, my brother ate my food. So anytime somebody puts a fork in my plate, I get all pissed off. This is not true for me, by the way. I don't know where that came from. But so maybe we get to address whatever that is, that feeling of being taken from, or of being of boundaries being violated, or not having anything of your own, or whatever it is, whatever the story is. Take some time to take a look at that and take whatever steps need to be taken to clear it, because otherwise we're held hostage, right? We're held hostage by our triggers, our buttons, our reactivity. And things are not always as they appear, right? Like somebody could say something just well-meaning, but I might have a context through which I think that people think very little of me, for example, and somebody makes a comment, and how I hear it is as a belittlement. I don't know if that's even a word, but I hear it as a belittling comment. That's how I take it. And that's how I react to it. And then I make up a whole story about this person and how rotten they are to say something so terrible. When in fact, it wasn't terrible. It wasn't intended that way. That person's not a terrible person. It's happening because of my past trauma, my interpretation, the lens that I'm perceiving through. And so it definitely makes it difficult to know what's real and what's not real. And that's always been my deepest question, is what's real and what's not real. So there we can make a distinction about what's real in my experience versus what's real. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody profoundly misinterpreted what you said? I remember I said to one person that I was having conflict with at one point, I said something like, I think I said, I don't need your approval. And I hope that you'll understand. I don't need your forgiveness, or it might have been approval. In other words, I don't need you to agree to approve of me. And, I respect you, something like that. And the way that the person interpreted it was as a slur to them. And I was just saying, I'm not here needing you to be any particular way, is what I meant. I don't need you to be any particular way with me in order to, like, you can, in other words, I was trying to say, however you are is fine. How I expressed it might not have been the greatest way. And they got very, very reactive. And as a result, there was a whole domino of effects, because maybe I didn't communicate effectively, but whatever I said, or the way that I said what I said, triggered them in a way that it ended our friendship. And it wasn't my intention. My intention was just to say, if you're angry at me, it's okay. Like, I accept that you can be angry at me. I'm not trying to make you be some other way. But it wasn't received that way. And because of the reactivity, the opportunity to communicate was shut down. So how do we transcend these miscommunications and misunderstandings when we're present, when we clear our own reactivity? Like, this person had a perception of me and my communication that wasn't accurate, and there was no way for me to communicate through that misperception. And we do this all the time. Things aren't always as they seem. We have these judgments about things based on our own history, our own reactivity. And we get to observe that. We get to find our own freedom. We get to find our own path to liberation. Our path to liberation is by freeing ourselves, healing ourselves of these traumas, allowing the limiting beliefs, perspectives, reactions to dissolve. And what remains as these things fall away, what remains is presence. When there's non-reactivity, when we're able to shed that, what remains is presence, where we can interact with the situation with curiosity and compassion for ourselves and for others. So that's the invitation, is to look at a place where you might be reactive and do some exploration to say, hey, what's really going on here? Somebody says that, and all of a sudden I have these feelings. What's going on with that? Where do they come from? How can I clear that? How can I allow that to be complete? So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel, as well as my Facebook page. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it is a pleasure, a privilege, an honor to have the opportunity to muse together on what it is to be human. So until next time, so much love to you.